All right, Julian, Peruvian. I've been looking forward to this one. How you doing, boys?
Really
Fantastic.
good.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for your work. Thank you for making a documentary about the Federal Reserve and the formation of it. I have watched it. I've watched it with the kids. They had questions. Lauren usually is here to ask the first question, but she's a little under the weather. So she would have asked you, what is the Federal Reserve? And bear in mind, you would have had to explain that to a 13-year-old.
The Federal Reserve. I'll go with my basic definition, but I'm sure Peruvian has a better one. Um, the Federal Reserve is an entity that controls the supply of money. If there's a demand for money from the private market, they create more. If there's a lack of demand, they claw it back in certain ways. And they think that that's the ideal way to control money rather than having a fixed supply. They want to coordinate with private institutions and also governments to figure out what the monetary supply should be. They sell debt. And through this superpower of being able to create money, they have essentially enslaved generations of people. They've also enslaved governments to an extent. And yeah, they're very they might not know it, but they're a very malicious organization in the sense that they wield a power that shouldn't really belong to humans.
Mhm.
Yeah. I would just add to that, it's an entity that the term the creature from Jekyll Island and the analogy to that story, uh Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde is very fitting because when the Fed was initially created, it was meant to be a backstop to the financial system, at least ostensibly, and it was like a lender of last resort, right? It was created in response to the 1907 banking panic and to prior panics that had almost crippled the major money centers of the industrializing America. And once it was created, once you get this foot in the door, this snake in the fox's den or whatever, it starts to grow and grow and grow, and it takes on more and more powers. Where originally the Fed was just this basically a decentralized reserve system for local banks, and then it starts to become more centralized. They put the power in one entity, which is the board of governors, and then they say, okay, well, the Fed, not only are they going to set interest rates, they're going to create reserves and change reserve levels, and then the Fed is going to have a dual mandate, and now they're responsible for inflation and unemployment, and now they're going to produce statistics by themselves, and those statistics are meant to be believed by the public. So at each stage and with each crisis, especially like 2008, for example, we saw expansions of the Fed mandate where, at the beginning it was just about banking system, major bank stability. And then it becomes, okay, well, we have to rescue AIG, we have to rescue hedge funds, we have to buy mortgage bonds. And then in 2020, we have to buy corporate bond ETFs, we have to buy treasuries and fund treasury deficits. Like this entity has kind of slithered its way into becoming this gargantuan behemoth that has so much control over the modern financial system and really the global financial system in general.
So your documentary, let's set the people up that are listening. You decided, let's get, let's get boots on the ground, go to Jekyll Island, which a lot of people don't even realize is a place, I guess. Like, a lot of us around the world, I'd never heard of Jekyll Island until like Ed's book, the creature from Jekyll Island. And I thought it was like, it even has like a fiction kind of tone to it. So you guys have been like this weird place, and I'll just read from Wiki. Jekyll Island is located off the coast of the U.S. state of Georgia. It is one of the Sea Islands and one of the Golden Isles of Georgia Barrier Islands. The island is owned by the state of Georgia and run by a self-sustaining, self-governing body. Uh, Blah blah blah. Location. When you look on the map, it's just kind of you got the state of Florida. It's kind of like northeast of the state of Florida there. Yeah, explain what it's like as a place to go, and whose idea was this, and how did all this come together?
I had the idea after reading the book, and I've always like here's the thing about the finance space is there's so much great literature out there. And there have been some really good documentaries, but I just find visually it's a little dry. And I think our objective as Bitcoiners is we want to inform as many people as possible. You want to speak people's languages. And so I thought, well, how do I explain this very heady story about a bunch of central bankers colluding together to basically control the global financial system? How do I show that in a cool way? All those guys are dead. And one route you could go and show that is you could just interview a bunch of economists and finance people and it's a bunch of talking heads and maybe some infographics. But I thought, how cool would it be if I got a bunch of younger people that are all really interested in this space, that have all gone on a Bitcoin journey, and we actually go down to the place where it happened and we do almost like a walking, talking podcast. We do all the exposition you would need in a documentary, but we put in a couple of interesting moments going through the beat by beat of how the Federal Reserve was established. We try and connect it to how's it relevant to the average person right now who doesn't know what those entities are. Maybe it's just seen Jerome Powell in a meme. And how do we make people ultimately care about a piece of history that was 100 years ago, 111 years ago, that still has massive implications today? And so the idea kind of stemmed out of that. Thankfully, there was a physical location where we could actually see some of the stuff that happened. We went into the room where the Magnificent Seven posted up and hatched the scheme, and we stayed in one of JP Morgan's mansions there on the island. And the island itself, like we learned, has some really cool stories. There are some odd burial sites where people have conveniently built houses on top of, like the Rockefellers. It's got this retirement home vibe to it, but it's also some like unsettling stuff. But it's also really beautiful. You can kind of understand why a whole bunch of I think it was at one point 25% of the wealth of the world had a piece of real estate on that island. So it was a very prestigious place for a very long time. And people would have these summer homes basically, or winter homes down there to escape the cold from the finance hub of the East in New York. So yeah, it had this really cool visual element to it. I was so lucky to have such magnificent talent. Peruvian Bull, Ian Carroll. I DM'd him. He was interested in the story. And we got this cool crew that just manages to tell the story in a really dynamic way. So pretty happy with how it turned out. Hopefully people find it interesting to watch.
Yeah, so you had Ian Carroll on there and Isabella and yourself and Peruvian walking through the story, which is great to see because all Bitcoiners, I think now Ian is like a fully fledged, like out of the closet Bitcoiner.
Yeah, he like obviously he gets it. But he, when you get, this is the thing about being a normal person or being another influencer and then going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, is there is pain that comes with trying to just pivot to just Bitcoin content. I've met some people who used to do, they had huge online followings for other reasons, and then they decide to get into Bitcoin, and people just drop off because they're not willing to go on that journey. And then you can't be their point of contact for all the tutorial stuff. So I know Ian has a whole bunch of other stuff that he's really interested in. I know the Epstein files are kind of the big thing right now. But I know at some point he'll find a way to squeak Bitcoin into more of his content. But it's hard. You can't just ram that down people's throats when you have an audience of people who came for other stuff first. Hey, I mean, you've dealt with that a bit, Proven, because you did more macro stuff and you've been pivoting a little harder into Bitcoin stuff.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I've always done Bitcoin content ever since I became a Bitcoiner in like 2022, 2023. But I would say that my content's mostly focused on macro, but with Ian, he was actually mostly like a crypto guy until Ben Wehrman and I orange pilled him in this is like December of I think 2022, back when he was really small on X and was just mainly on TikTok, or actually it was December 2023, excuse me. And it was funny because he had the same objections that everyone else had, like, why is Bitcoin different? Why can't Cardano do the same thing? Why can't Solana? And so we just like showed him all the problems with those blockchains, and we explained to him the uniqueness of Bitcoin. And after just like 3 hours of arguing, he was just like, okay, I give up. I think you guys are probably right. And he has, to his credit, like he's gone on Nostr. He made a whole video like explaining how Nostr works and how it's the true decentralized social media. He has an account. He posts his content there, and he's getting boosted. Like his first one got like 400,000 sats or 500,000 sats. Like he's earning money now. And when I saw him in this was last fall, he told me over dinner that he's like, every time I get more than 10K or 20K in my savings account, I just put all of it into Bitcoin immediately. He's like, I'm just putting it all in the Bitcoin because he's like, he understands now, especially with his research into the financial system and the Epstein case, like how insidious our modern banking system is, and so he wants to have something that is outside of that. And so I think he gets it. But you're right, it is hard to make pure Bitcoin content when your main content stack is somewhere else.
Yeah. And I saw he started a thread on this book, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace
Mm.
Mullins. Yes, so we've all read, I hope, most people have probably heard of The Creature from Jekyll Island and Ed Griffin's book, which is great. But I love this one. I've been shilling this book for so long for Bitcoiners to pick up and read. And I even did a book club with John Vallis, Ray. I'm blanking on his surname. Is that Ray Sivkit? I can only think of his.
Oh, Yusuf.
Yeah, Ray. Yeah, yes, thank you. And at Hartzler, and this is episode 352. If anyone wants to go back and listen to that afterwards, where we go right deep into Eustace Mullins' work here, and it was just great to see that Ian was picking up on that and going through it. And I've also noticed another influencer in air quotes, Matt from Cultivate Elevate, talking about this book as well. So it's getting out there. And Eustace wrote this in 1948, wasn't published until 1953 because nobody would touch it. And it's just an incredible, incredible book because he gets all of the research he was doing at the Library of Congress or the Congressional Library, whatever you call it, and then getting fact checked, and all of his notes were complete fact checked the whole time. And once you read this, there's any questions of there being a conspiracy theory and oh no, bro, you're overthinking it, are off the table. No, this happened deliberately with one specific goal, and that was to hammer out the Federal Reserve Act. And that was in 1910. Then it took them 3 years to do the dog and pony show around the US to actually get the thing through in a very underhanded manner at Christmas week of 1913. I would like to know from you guys, like, what part of this story just creeped you out the most? Like, when you were going down this rabbit hole, what was the most like despicable part of the whole thing that, really hit home, hit a nerve with you, or you saw in someone else, like whether it was Isabella or Ian when you were making these making the film?
Well,
That's a great
I
question.
can if Julian has anything, I can go first, but I can think of several things, right? The first is what you mentioned at the outset, the kind of insidious, backhanded, shady room deal that was made in order to get this passed. Even prior to the creation of the Fed, the American populace was in this environment of trust busting, anti-banker, anti-monopoly, right? This was the Teddy Roosevelt heydays. And, you saw Standard Oil, these large companies be broken into dozens of subsidiaries. And the population in general did not trust any large, corporate entity, but especially not any large bank. And so in the aftermath of the 1907 banking panic, which again, ironically, is caused by the misallocation, or I should say, under regulation of shadow banks, essentially trust companies that were acting as banks and were not regulated. And so they were under reserved. And like any fractional reserve system, when you have an under reserved system and there's a run, then some entities go belly up and then the entire system is at risk. And in the aftermath of that, they created the National Monetary Commission. And Paul Warburg was one of the people heading that up. And he started writing reports talking about the issues of a decentralized banking system and why we needed a central bank. And Nelson Aldrich also, obviously the senator was very, very in support of this. And I think he proposed the bill for the National Monetary Commission. And so they essentially had years of propaganda with the large press entities like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times putting out these articles saying, here's why we need a central bank. Here's the issues with this banking system we have now. The correspondent bank system where rural banks all put the reserve in a centralized city bank. And then if that city bank goes, all these reserve banks are at risk. This isn't sustainable. We need a national central bank that has all the bank's reserves. And once that argument was made, and then once they tried to push the first iteration of it through and it failed, that was like a slap in the face to them, because that so that happened in January of 1912, and the Republicans had just swept the House and the Senate, if I'm not mistaken. And their entire plan, which was initially called the National Reserve Association, was shot down. And just a few months later, right, there's that tinfoil of the Titanic sinking and
Yeah.
certain bankers allegedly on the Titanic who were opposed to this bill. But that occurs. And then December 1913, obviously, like a year and a half later, they're able to get the bill passed with about a quarter of the House gone and a third of the Senate gone for Christmas, because the bill was passed like December 22nd, 1913. So right before Christmas. And, that kind of backhanded nature was kind of emblematic of how they were thinking about this bill, right? The initial one, also, the initial National Reserve Association, it was much different in that the chair of, basically like the chairman of the Fed, was appointed by the bankers themselves. And this time they said, oh no, it's going to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. So they made this quasi-governmental structure to make it appear as if on the surface the Fed was actually like controlled by the government, when in reality the government was only like the face of this larger banking cartel that had the real power, because all of the local Federal Reserve district banks, 9 out of 12 of the board members had to be appointed by local banks. And so when you have a supermajority on every single board of all the Federal Reserve banks, then what you essentially get is control over that entire banking system. And they also, wrote into law, which was a different than the National Reserve Association. They wrote into the new Federal Reserve Charter that all the local banks were forced to buy in to their local Federal Reserve Bank. So it wasn't optional anymore. It wasn't just, hey, this is an idea. If you want to have reserves here at this like kind of federally sanctioned private entity, you can. It was no, everyone at force of closing business has to buy equity in the Fed, in their local Federal Reserve Bank, and then they get kickbacks in the form of dividends. And so the end result was kind of this insidious, dark, backhanded system that looks on the surface like it's controlled by the people, but actually has no real control from anyone other than the bankers themselves.
I think the saddest thing to me is, I think if we were to live in an alternate history where we're confronted with another 1910 situation, people wouldn't care. At least back then, the central bankers and the people who wanted this idea, they were afraid of the public, right? They had prior history of Andrew Jackson fighting against this. They had 2 central bank operations that they kind of dismantled, and the people didn't want this. The people were educated enough back then, in an era without the internet, to know that a central bank was a bad idea, and the only way they got it passed was through the dark of night. Nowadays, it's like no one cares. We have all this information about how insidious this stuff is at our fingertips. We have great influencers making stuff about all this, and man, it's hard to find people out there who still care about this, So to me, that's the hardest part, is we've just been so gaslit into thinking this is the way that money is supposed to work, that we can't even envision an alternate system. And the amount of blowback that you get when you propose the idea of like a fixed money supply or something, as if you're the crazy one, as if that isn't, a model that's based in physics and reality. And we don't have tons of models of central banks failing to know that it's not going to work long term. It's insane. It's like we're always being told that we're the crazy ones. And it's an incredible amount of gaslighting. And the worst part about it too, and this always cracks me up, like you brought this up in the documentary, all these central bankers, they all come out 5-10 years after a crisis, and they always say, yeah, we might have caused that. That might have been like a little oopsie. Maybe some of our data was lagging behind. A little oopsie depression there, a bunch of Americans dying, famine, all that. Oopsie, little central bank mistake. We raised the interest rates too high. And then 2008, oopsie, maybe we didn't have the right policies in check. Oopsie, maybe we measured inflation incorrectly, even though that we're tasked to do that to make policy decisions. It's always like apologies in hindsight. And then we just carry on with our lives. And it's terrible. There's zero accountability. There's no mechanism for accountability, really. So yeah, it's insidious. It's crazy that there was no mechanism for accountability when this thing was created. Like no one thought, maybe we should have like a little backdoor thing to shut this down if it gets out of control. And there is none. Bitcoin, that's it. It's a free market invention to make them accountable.
Yes. So for me, some of like the most like insidious parts of this whole thing were the characters involved that, with malice aforethought, had been plotting behind the scenes for a decade to a decade and a half beforehand. Because, like you said, there've been 2 attempts at a central bank in the US, so this isn't a new thing. And the people that are truly pulling the strings behind this, it's all, if you follow it all and if you read all the books and following down the rabbit holes, it always stems back to like the City of London, the Rothschild banking family, the capture of the Bank of England at the after the Battle of Waterloo, and there's all this like really, yes, we get gaslit as well. Like America won their independence, and I think there's a famous quote by Rothschild saying something along the lines of "Bring those impudent Americans back under the Union" or something. Like and he knew the only way to do that was to get a central bank put in place. And Alexander Hamilton was linked very, very closely with the formation of the first one. He was actually acting on behalf of them. That was shut down after 20 years because they only got the charter for 20 years. The second one, I think you mentioned, Jackson got shut down. And then he had an attempt on his life. Funny.
Two.
Right.
And he was the first president, by the way, to ever have an assassination attempt on his life. And his his re-election campaign in 1832 was centered around the phrase of "I'm going to kill the bank." And he killed the bank. And then after he died, on his tombstone, I've heard that there's an epitaph written saying, like, I killed the bank. So he was one of the last few ardent, anti-central bankers that we had. And a lot of people also have misconceptions about the Panic of 1837, where, he basically vetoes the renewal of the bank charter, the Second National Bank, which was, again, an early iteration of the Federal Reserve. And that next year, we saw a massive banking panic, the Panic of 1837 in the United States. But a large reason why that was caused is because the British bankers refused to extend credit to American banks and to finance trade between Britain and America. And since they were our largest trading partner, that caused a crisis of confidence in our own banks, because suddenly we didn't have like 30% of our credit needs fulfilled. And so like this idea that the system is so fragile is almost a misnomer, right? Because in some ways it's like it's fragile because they make sure it's fragile so that they can twist it and break it when they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. They're in full control of it. And I often wonder, like, Jerome Powell, does he have any idea? Like, do you sit him down like training day, like during your probation, and like go through this book and figure out like this is how we all did this, and or just a dude that has no clue what he's actually doing and perpetrating across a globe, like because everything is linked to the US dollar. Like, I go back and forth on that. I mean, how could you not know to a certain extent?
I think he knows. I mean, some of his public statements, he's mentioned, for example, that he knows that the fiscal path is unsustainable, and he knows that the Fed like is kind of trapped, and he's said that at multiple FOMC meetings. But I think it's like you're paid to look the other way. It's a problem, but when you're getting paid $700,000 a year and you get to go to give speeches at Citadel and Virtu and all the big Wall Street funds, like you just don't want to admit that and that's a very easy thing to do if you're paid for that. So
Yeah, it's not his problem. Right? Like he's I can't predict, when we'll hit a fiscal cliff or anything like that, but likely he's out of there before, a really like serious reckoning. And I think that's like a lot of these guys, they live in echo chambers. I think the biggest lie that they tell us, but I think they live the lie themselves, is that economists and these central bankers are very close to being scientists. Like there's a science to this whole thing, um, when there's not. Right? Like it's nonsense. I don't know how to like elaborate on that more, but I think when you put these people in a position of power like Jerome Powell, they have their mandates that they're supposed to do, but he also knows that half the job is just how you present yourself. Like there are people that watch his hand movements during FOMC. There's people who say, "Oh, he was a little shaky or he had a little flutter in his voice." So half of his job is just basically just performative. And then in terms of what he does when he's not on camera, like I don't know, but every single word that comes out of his mouth is very scrutinized, and he obviously has to be extremely careful with how he prognosticates about his feelings towards the economy, or the trajectory of monetary policy. So I think he's none the wiser, I think, a little bit to the realities on the ground.
So I did mention, and then I didn't elaborate, that one of the big takeaways from the book was all of these like nefarious connections that have been leading up to the formation of another bank, and there are two particular names. So one, Nelson Aldrich, who was he, and what was the nefarious connection that I've learned about. And the other was Paul Warburg, and these were two very key people. Obviously, there were seven of them there. But Warburg was by far and away like the driver of the whole thing. Like he was the brains behind the operation. And Nelson, obviously, he was coming from like the Monetary Commission. Is that correct? Have I got that right, Peruvian?
yeah, and I know. Well, I think he passed the bill to establish it. I don't remember if he was actually on it, but I do remember that he was the head of the Senate Banking Committee, and he was a powerful senator from Connecticut, and he'd been in office for years, and so he was an instrumental player in getting the government to push these changes through. Right? You need
Yeah,
someone
I
on the
think
side.
was he not even like mandated by Congress to go and like set this meeting up and do this think tank, or there's something there I'm murky on. Like,
I think he was for the National Monetary Commission, yes, but
right.
I don't think he was for the National Reserve Association, like the actual precursor to the Fed. I think that was their own, idea. But for the National Monetary Commission, yes, that was absolutely approved by Congress. And that was
Mm.
just more of a they were trying to research, right? Like what are the potential solutions to all these banking panics? And ironically, of course, I'm sure that Congress initially was just thinking, okay, we need to have better regulation, higher reserve requirements, stricter lending standards. Don't let the banks give margin loans to, the Hines brothers who are, trying to corner the copper market in 1907, and then they blow up on a copper mining stock. Like there were probably specific goals they had in mind, but they didn't delineate them enough. And so the people who took over the National Monetary Commission just ran with it of, let's just make this a pro-Fed, pro-central bank propaganda arm and just put out a bunch of research saying that this is what we need to fix the money.
So learning from Eustace, and this is why I find these two characters so interesting. In particular, is Nelson himself. His son was married to no, excuse me, his daughter Abigail Albright was married in 1901. So we're going back 12 years before this meeting was set up. Excuse me, 9 years. Math's not math in there. Uh, she married John D. Rockefeller Jr. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, what? Hang on a minute. So you've got John D. Rockefeller Jr. marries Abigail Albright. So that links those families like that. And fun fact, that's why Nelson Rockefeller, his full name is Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller. Like you can't write this shit. Like you can Wikipedia that right now if you want. But there you go. And he went on, obviously, to become, he got as high as vice president, right? I believe in the 70s. Anyway, let's wind back. So you've got these two key characters, right? Nelson Aldrich, who's going to host the whole think tank in Jekyll Island, and Paul Warburg, who drives it. So you've already got Nelson linked directly to Rockefeller. No, so who's Paul Warburg, and where does he fit into this? Because he's a German dude, right? I mean, why is he out living in the US? And again, you learn this through Eustace and his deep diving. He settled in New York in 1902 as a partner in Kuhn Loeb and Company, where the influential Jacob Schiff was senior partner. Jacob Schiff was the broker to the Rothschild family in Europe. And you're like, yeah, damn, like this. So you've got the Rockefeller puppet masters over here in the US and the Rothschild puppet masters over here moving their pawns into the game. Set the meeting up. Then 5 other guys, they all join, representing JP Morgan's interest and some other people. I can't remember. There's Benjamin Strong, Piat
Andrews.
And yeah,
Fiat Andrews.
You guys have seen the picture of all these guys in the actual room, right? Mm-hmm. Where that to me would have sent chills down my spine.
Mm-hmm. It was very chilling. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things going on with the island and the story as well, right? When they initially had the train car, for example, in Jersey, they had it under a different name. They all walked on the train car under pseudonyms because they didn't even want the servants to know that they were planning this meeting, because the press, again, at the time, this is the heyday of the anti-Rockefeller, anti-monopoly, anti-big bank sentiment in the United States, and this trust-busting attitude from Teddy Roosevelt was permeating the American press. And so the press was actually following the major bankers of the day. And so if you're a JP Morgan, if you're Jacob Schiff, you can't just go and do a meetup with like 5 of your buddies and have that tracked, because then everyone's going to be speculating in the press. What are they planning? What are they doing? And whatever comes out of that meeting, they're going to oppose. And so that's why they kind of slipped in under the cover of night, under the cover of darkness, and use these names to sneak their way to Jekyll. And Jekyll itself is also very secluded, right? There's a bridge now to the island, but I'm not sure if you remember this, Julian, but I think the person told us that the bridge was only constructed in like the 70s or 80s. Prior to that, there was no bridge. You could only access it by boat. Yeah, just a ferry or a boat. So it's very secluded, very quiet place, and the only other people around are other rich people who are, going to keep quiet because they probably have interests with what you're doing as well.
Yep, it was 22nd of November 1910. I'm reading straight from the book here. That it was in Hoboken in New York, right? New Jersey?
New Jersey. It was Jersey,
New Jersey,
yeah.
New Jersey, Hoboken. And this is back in a day where you'd travel in style in a private car. So the private car wasn't even hooked up. Like they got everybody, all the plebs on the train first, cleared the station, then wheeled in the private car. Then these guys snuck out the back into the private car so they could sit there with their whiskeys and their brandies and their cigars and whatever else.
All wearing duck hunting uniforms too.
That's right.
That was the official reason for everyone else.
Dressed as duck hunters. Right? It's just rich guys going out on a duck hunt, nothing to see here, and in our private car with our butlers and our servants and our,
To be fair, they probably did some duck hunting there.
Sure
just after setting up the Federal Reserve,
So I've just found a list. I found the list here from the book. Accompanying Senator Aldrich were his private secretary, Shelton, right? And then Shelton A. Pierre Andrew, whoever that is, who was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, then also Special Assistant of the National Monetary Commission, Frank Vanderlip.
Mm-hmm.
This is weird the way it's written. Frank Vanderlip, President of the National City Bank of New York. Oh, yeah. Then President of the National City Bank of New York, Henry P. Davison. Senior partner of JP Morgan Company and generally regarded as Morgan's personal emissary, and Charles D. Norton, president of the Morgan-dominated First National Bank of New York. And then also joining Benjamin Strong, also known as a lieutenant of JP Morgan, and Paul Warburg, a recent immigrant from Germany. Guys, why is there this random German dude on the? Come on, like this wasn't an accident, right?
Yeah.
Who was representing the House of Kuhnloeb and Company, who I just said was involved with the Rothschilds. Uh, yeah, so these were the dudes, and you've got some pretty weird. What was the feel on the actual island? You Peruvian. You were telling me about like these giant chairs and stuff. Like
Oh yeah.
what was that about?
Yeah, it was strange. And I think, I'm sure Julian has his own comments on this as well. But when we arrived, it is an idyllic location. It is quite beautiful, but there's this weird feeling in the air, kind of eerie. And as we're walking around, it is this kind of like almost feeling of like an abandoned retirement home where all these historic, beautiful, like, you know, early 1900s buildings are situated. They're all kind of splayed out along this long walkway. So there's like buildings on either side, and it actually starts at the JP Morgan house, and there's this huge road that goes on beyond it. But what was strange is that first of all, there's all these gargoyles, like little demonic figures on all these arches on these houses behind the JP Morgan house, where the JP Morgan estate where they held the Federal Reserve. But Ian and I, when we were walking around with Mark and doing our portion of the filming, we found some of these giant chairs, which looked pretty old. I mean, I don't know if they were there from the 1900s, but they looked at least like 20, 30 years old because the paint was peeling and the wood was a little rotted. But these chairs were, the seat was maybe like 6.5 feet tall. Like it would require someone to jump or have like a stool to get up on it. And the chair itself was a total of probably 12 or 13 feet tall. And no one had any explanation as to why these giant chairs were there or what they meant. So I'm not really sure what to make of that.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I those are some yeah, those details are always odd. For me, the island has this natural energy that's kind of odd, like the trees. You kind of have the willows, which is a little bit typical of Georgia, kind of like southern Georgia. These trees are kind of coming out of the ground like tentacles, and they're having these like long strands of moss. And then when you go to the northern or the eastern side of the island, you have these fossilized or petrified trees right near the ocean that I think are almost the same ones, and the branches are just going everywhere. It looks like tentacles. Like we made that analogy, and I kind of had that in the film too. They look like tentacles. It looks like the island is almost a bottle cap holding something down. And I don't know if I'm just tripping and my imagination is too crazy, but it feels like that. It feels like there's something otherworldly underneath the entire island. And
Mm-hmm.
then you start hearing about all the burial stuff too, like all the burial ceremonies. And if you just know the history of,
All right, lay it on us. What's the dark shit behind the burial ceremonies? What was going on?
well, you got to go watch the doc because I explain it pretty well. But essentially, there is a Rockefeller house that is built right on top of a mound where it's very likely that there was child sacrifice. Now, I did ask the museum people, and they said, "Oh no, that's the old wives' tale." But you just have to put it together. Like child sacrifice, very popular thing amongst the nomadic Mayans that were coming up through Mexico and up in that area back in like the old days. Very common practice, very common ritual. And then the Indians that were part of that area, called the Gwali Indians, also by two different settlers, were reported to be unusually tall as well. Like they had tribal leaders that were 7.5 feet tall. Apparently, that might explain the chairs. Maybe it's a reference to that. But multiple, records from the French and the Spanish saying, yeah, we ran into some really tall Indians here who were very friendly, by the way, which was a little bit unusual as well. But the whole story with the Indian Mound Cottage is that a bunch of French explorers came, they met up, and they did a little ceremony there, and they saw some weird shit, and they left. And apparently, that's where a lot of baby bodies are buried, right underneath the Rockefeller house. And they knew that when they were building it too, obviously. The
Yeah.
history has been preserved on that island pretty well. There's a building, we didn't get to check it out. There's a building from like the 1700s there. A couple just rocks on one of the ends of the island. So It's a lot of history, a lot of things preserved there.
And in the Rockefeller cottage, if I'm not mistaken, Julian, there was the wife was Anne Rockefeller. She didn't like that the Indian mound was blocking her view of the sea, and so she ordered it excavated, and basically like all the bones moved somewhere else on the island and scattered. And that was kind of the idea of like, you know,
Yeah.
maybe part of this curse that began on the island was because she did that and disturbed this burial ground for people that had been
Yeah.
used for centuries.
Bad juju for sure.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's all so creepy. It's all so creepy. And when did that happen? Was that prior to the meeting? Did the meeting take place in the
Oh
Rockefeller
yeah.
house or somewhere else?
No, it was in the JP Morgan estate. Yeah, but it happened from what I remember. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Julian. It happened prior to the meeting.
Yeah.
Like the
On the
Rockefellers had
yeah,
an
the
estate
Rockefellers
there.
had their house there, I
Hmm.
think back starting the 1800s probably.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. Right. So they do the meeting, right? 1910. And then I'll read from the book again. Then is hatched the Aldrich Plan, right? The Aldrich Plan. This is what it was called. The participants in the Jekyll Island Conference returned to New York to direct a nationwide propaganda campaign in favor of the Aldrich Plan. Three of the leading universities, Princeton, Harvard, and the University of Chicago, Rockefeller funded, by the way, were used as the rallying points for this propaganda, and national banks had to contribute to a fund of $5 million to persuade, propagandize, the American public that this central bank plan should be enacted into law by Congress.
5 million back then?
Yep.
That is some stacks for a propaganda campaign. Damn.
Well, look what they get on the back end of it. 115
Yeah,
years
good
of just
payout, hey?
printing cash whenever they want, right? Like, it's just
Jeez.
insane. The level of planning and evil intent behind all of this is unquestionable. And then here's your boy, Woodrow Wilson, governor of New Jersey and former president of Princeton University. So he's implicated two times, right? So he's the governor of New Jersey, where they all met on the. He was enlisted as a spokesman for the Aldrich Plan. During the Panic of 1907, Wilson had declared all this trouble could be averted if we appointed a committee of 6 or 7 public spirited men like J.P. Morgan to handle the affairs of our country. The whole thing was set up, guys. You think Wilson was just president by chance when he got to sign through the Federal Reserve Act? Like, no way. No way.
No, they sold it out. I don't know if this is true, but I did read it that apparently on Woodrow Wilson's deathbed, he said that was one of his biggest regrets is signing this act into law, and he said it was going to have implications like 100 years down the line. I don't know if that's true. It's hard to verify that, but I
I
can
have
believe it.
read that as well. Yeah, like
Yeah.
one of my life's regrets was indebting the American people to slavery of like something like that. Because yeah, there were a few, and this is what I love about the book. There's a Congressman Charles Lindbergh who was like one of the voices in Congress pushing back on this, and he stated, "Our financial system is a false one and a huge burden on the people. I have alleged that there is a money trust. The Aldrich Plan is a scheme plainly in the interest of the trust. Why does the money trust press so hard for the Aldrich Plan now before the people know what the money trust has been doing?" And he goes on to say, "The Aldrich Plan is the Wall Street plan. It is a broad challenge to the government by the champion of the money trust. It means another panic, if necessary, to intimidate the people." So he was on top of this stuff. This congressman, I wonder what happened to him, because who's who's there now raising the alarm, right? Do we have
Nobody.
it, right?
Yo, there
Yeah,
was there
nobody.
was a guy. God,
People
his
have
name
pointed Thomas
isn't.
Massey. They say, he's the guy beating the desk, saying Rand Paul, maybe, but I don't. He's not in Congress, I believe. Maybe he is. Cynthia Lummis, obviously our Bitcoin queen,
Hmm.
but like otherwise,
I'm trying to. There there was, I can't remember his name. There was a journalist who sued the Federal Reserve right after 2008 collapse because the Federal Reserve didn't transparently publish how much they had lent to the big banks like JP Morgan and all that. They were floating around very vague numbers, and he was like, nope, this doesn't seem right. So he sues them. He wins. They publish that JP Morgan was lent trillions from the Federal Reserve in overnight repo to basically stop them from going belly up. 5 months later, after he wins this case, dies of a heart attack. Coincidence? 54 years old? I don't know. I don't know.
If you go deep enough down this rabbit hole, you'll find a lot of those coincidences, I think.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those things where, you know, it just is a lucky death, or, you know, a lone assassin who's just acting on rage over something that happened 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, it's a dark, dark path. And I think that they, you know, the people, especially at the highest levels, know that, and that's where they leverage it. It's the same thing with the Boeing stuff, right? We've seen how many Boeing whistleblowers die, and it's just like all classified as suicides right before they're meant to testify on Boeing's safety controls.
So what do you do about all this stuff? Because I just like, you hear these theories and you hear this stuff happen, and it definitely has an effect, I think, on maybe making you a little bit nihilistic. But like that's what I find is so hard, is I read all this stuff, Epstein and all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, all this sucks and we're all being lied to and we're all being scammed. What do you actually do about it? And I think that's kind of, I got sick and tired of reading all this stuff and feeling helpless and feeling, 100% victimized. And that's why Bitcoin's so powerful for me, because now it's like, well, now I don't have to spend all day, getting mad and figuring out, oh, we're being screwed left, right, and center. It's like, well, now I can just try to ignore it on my Twitter feed and just save for my future. And the weirdest thing about it is, it's like BlackRock kind of wants to do the same thing. Like they also want to get out of this shitstorm that we're in, and they're also stacking the same asset, So
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know, man.
Bitcoin's a good escape valve from all this deep dark treachery, I guess.
Yeah, and I am very glad that I found Bitcoin before I found all this stuff, because if you do this in reverse, like you can be black pilled pretty bad pretty quick, and that is where the nihilism sets in, and like you're just on a downward spiral. Luckily for me, I already had the bright orange life buoy around me, and I can read these and I can read them critically and I can educate myself, but I don't let it freaking the blackness creep in. I was just talking to Jeff about this last night, Jeff Booth, because I brought this up with him, because in his speech in Madeira, he said, you just have to remember there is no they, there is only us. And I know Jeff's gone deep on this stuff. Like Jeff knows, right? He's read all about the Rockefeller stuff and Foundation, Council on Foreign Relations, and all this kind of real bad energy. The IMF, the World Bank, you name it, right? NATO, UN, like all of it, all this stuff that we've been told has been put in place for our safety has been like the complete opposite every single time. And he said, he got to the point where he just, he realized by giving it any kind of energy, he was feeding it. Mm-hmm. So he just had to just draw a line in the sand. No more of that shit. Because by giving it noise, by pointing at it, by screaming at it, I'm feeding it. Whereas I'm just going to do my thing over here in Bitcoin land. And that's when he left all of his board appointments and other fiat companies and whatever else. He's like, no, just wind it all back. No foot in the fiat world at all. Just all gone to Bitcoin. And that's what you guys are doing. That's what I do in my pod. What you're doing with your documentary making films. That's what Peruvian's doing with his macro research and everything else. Yeah, I really hope that people don't get too discouraged by all of this darkness, because it is bad shit done by bad people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the hardest thing about this is, I think printing money obviously steals our time, but I think it also distorts how we reflect upon our own time and how we value it. It creates these little silos and boxes where we just have to struggle to survive, and we can't even take the non-survival mentality approach to taking the higher picture and looking at like, look, I only have this much time on this earth. Maybe it's not all about gaining as much capital as possible. Like, what do I actually want out of this life? And I think that is the most malicious downstream effect of money printing and central banking, is kind of what it does to the soul and what it does to the spirit. And we sort of touch upon that by the end of the doc, is that when you print money, it forces people to sin, because you can win in this system. Like, it's not like this system suppresses you and it screws over everyone. It's like, no, there's very like clear ways you can manipulate this system to your advantage. You can just ride the coattails of the stock market. You can take advantage of other people's nihilism and make a profitable business out of that. There's all these little like new economic models that open up when you have central banking. And I'm not to say that everyone who's successful right now is, sinning to get there, but certainly there are incentives baked into money printing that I don't think exists on a Bitcoin standard. I don't think it's profitable to sin as hard, on a Bitcoin standard, because people actually value their money like they value their time. And it's just not that way right now. And it's so hard to explain that concept to people, because you have to get through all the weeds when you're talking about Bitcoin. It's like, oh, it's this asset, it's finite, Satoshi, blah, blah, blah. And I always want to skip to the good part, which is talking about the spiritual ramifications of a hard money standard. But we can do it amongst ourselves as Bitcoiners. But I'm trying as an educator to find the cheat code on how to skip there or get there a little bit faster with the normie audiences who don't quite get the entire picture of Bitcoin right off the bat. I don't want to have to explain Jekyll Island every single time I talk to somebody fresh on the street. I want to get into the spiritual ramifications of why hard money matters and get them on board, And so it's the ephemeral challenge we have to deal with as Bitcoiners. There's no skipping the 100 hours, I guess, but maybe there's a way to knock it down to 80 or something. That's my life goal right now, is to try and figure out how do we make that journey a little quicker without skipping the good parts.
Yeah. What's so horrible about the system too is, right, like you were mentioning this earlier, Julian, is that we're taught that this is for our benefit, right?
Yeah.
This is needed. This is necessary. And I studied economics and finance at a, major US university, and it was pounded into my head day in and day out. Keynesianism is good. Money printing is good. QE saves everything. There's no negative externalities. Don't worry about asset prices, ripping up. Just ride the wave. Inflation is good, right? 2% is what we need in order to have a healthy economy. Like all these beliefs, which are, by the way, they're funded by, banks and governments who have an incentive to continue these lies, to continue people believing that they need to have this system in order to survive. And it gets to the point, right, where you go, like I go on Twitter and I've had economic arguments with tons of macro guys or tons of, fund managers or other people, like just investors, traders, about these topics. And it's so funny because they're so indoctrinated that you cannot have a sound money system. They believe that it's literally impossible. They're like, how will we have economic growth if there's not credit growth? How are we going to build a factory? How can I buy a house if I can't borrow for it? And I'm like, well, have you heard of saving? Imagine if the house price was a fifth of what it is. Imagine if it's only 100 grand. And imagine you don't actually have to go out and take a loan. Imagine you can just work for your money, put it in a safe place, and then go and buy it when you have it, just like you do with everything else. Like imagine that kind of a system. And for them, it's like inconceivable that we could have a functioning economic system under a monetary system that was not expanding constantly, and under a banking system that wasn't debt based, right? And so it's just like it breaks their brain because they've been indoctrinated by this insidious ideology. And really, to change it, I mean, you have to change the incentive structures at every major university, at every educational institution in the US, because I think especially the economics field is completely beholden to the bankers' interests, and they essentially exist as a outgrowth of the Fed and of the the US government, and they just want to justify their goal is to justify whatever actions are taken, no matter how drastic they are. There's no actual criticism or understanding of the implications of what they're doing.
That's a really good point. Like it's a pipeline, dude. Like the
Mm-hmm.
Federal Reserve has 10,000 employees. What do they
Mm-hmm.
do? Like, what do they
Mm-hmm.
do? I think there's 1,000 people dedicated towards just figuring out what inflation is. And they still, to this day, they walk into grocery stores and they just take pictures of prices. And then I think for the, what's that measurement for house prices or owner's equivalent rent or whatever?
They've called owner's equivalent rent.
They
So
literally
instead of actually,
canvas on doors and they say, hey, well, if you're not renting, like if you were, what would you pay? It's like,
yeah.
okay, that's 20% of the inflation figure is some dude just asking people, well, if you were going to rent your place, what would you rent it for? Like that's not even
Mm-hmm.
close to coming to the truth of inflation. It's insanity to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah, and if you go back and look at the adjustments in the CPI, I mean, they've made an adjustment on average every 18 months to the basket for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
So they're essentially continually moving the goalposts so that you never actually know what the true inflation number is. And yeah, they do things like that. So the owner's equivalent rent is like not an actual rent figure. They ask people hypothetically, what do you think the rent would be? And I'm like, you could also just go and look at real rent prices and not ask hypotheticals to people who aren't even in the market. They also do things like, technological hedonic adjustments. So if a new iPhone comes out and it has 3 cameras instead of 2 and it's the same price, like let's say, Apple's had some innovation with their manufacturer, they've improved their, logistics and their shipping, they've reduced costs, and so they can give you the same phone with a better camera or a third camera for the same price. They'll say, okay, we're going to assume that camera is worth $250. So the value of the phone instead of being $1,000 is $750. So that actually means that we've had slight deflation in the metric, and so the overall CPI doesn't go up as much as it would, right? So
They come
they
up
do
with
all
their
these
own
games.
prices.
Yeah, they do all these games, and to take 1,000 of these economists to calculate a single metric is laughable. But it's endemic of this problem, right? If you study econometrics, this is if you go to any PhD program or master's program, which I almost actually went into one, to study this stuff, you have to study econometrics, and it's basically the use of statistics to calculate government metrics, as well as like calculating supply and demand curves, all that, all the economic jargon. And the irony is, I remember in one of my courses where I was just taking the introductory, I was like, what's the actual, like, will any of this actually work in the real world? And then she's like, no, this is all theoretical. Like, here's the theoretical inflation rate of this theoretical basket that we imagine in a theoretical economy. And we're going to do a bunch of statistics to imagine what it would be. I'm like, what? Who cares? Like, seriously, guys, what, you guys all have your head in the clouds? Like, are you kidding me? No. Dude, tell me what it is today. How about you tell me how the economy works today? How about you tell me about what entrepreneurs are doing today that is helping us? Like, who gives a shit? No offense, but who gives a shit about this stuff? It's ridiculous. And all these, so you mentioned the Fed problem. There are, you're right, there are thousands of economists that are just dedicated to single or maybe multi-metrics, and all they do is debate with each other all day over like tiny little things, like should orange juice be included as a juice or should it be a concentrate in the metric, or if we don't want to adjust the value, breakfast, should we put turkey bacon in there or turkey sausage as an option? Like that's literally what they're debating. And so if you if you think about it, again, this entire system is fake, and they've created these credentials to, I guess, legitimize the fake people who work within it, who aren't actually doing anything real. And to finish up the point, we haven't seen, I don't think, from what I remember reading, there hasn't been a Federal Reserve chairman in the last 40 years who ever worked in the private sector. The last one was Volcker, which was the 1980s. And of all the governors, like the general on the board, the only other experience they generally have is banking. Like there was not one entrepreneur in the last like 65, 70 years. So if you're talking about the real economy, they're either government or, academia. Like that's the only experience they have. And so when they're having discussions about what really works in the real economy, all of it's just hypotheticals. It's just ideas. None of them have any understanding or any real world experience. And so it's truly a sham system, held up by sham people. It's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Oh man, like how back to your question, how does it all come tumbling down? Because like end the Fed, right? What I mean, seriously, that's never going to happen. I don't think so. And this this comes back to all of the education that people like myself and you guys have been doing. And what's happened over the last kind of 6 weeks or so with the new administration coming in, and just it feels as though it's all being pushed back. We've taken giant steps forward, and now it's just all being pushed back because we're getting this shitcoin reserve of goodness knows what else is in this basket, and all of the education is, the waters are getting muddied again. Yeah, I don't know. It can be overwhelming to think about. Or you get like stacks that, stay humble, right? Like there's a reason we say that, and trying to. Do you think there will be? And I don't know how deep either of you have gone on the topic of what happened in 1933 with Executive Order 6102. How do you guys think about that? Having done a deep dive into like the insidious nature of the secrets of the Federal Reserve, have you done a deep dive into that particular time in history, and do you see it, repeating if not rhyming?
I like the whole thesis of my co-founder Adam, who also runs Bitcoin Well, is that like that will come for Bitcoin. There will be a version of a 6102 for Bitcoin without a doubt. And so the impetus is on us to get out and start spending this stuff. This is why I cannot stand, and like we did an episode on this with Sailor, this idea that it's just a bunch of crypto paranoid anarchists who want to sell you hardware wallets. It's like, no, we know history, and I know Sailor's talking to a crowd when he says this stuff. I know he doesn't actually believe it because he's a student of history. He knows this shit. They're going to come for it. I don't know if it's going to happen in his lifetime, maybe not. But they're going to come for Bitcoin. And if we don't establish our own, call it an underground economy, or a way of transacting peer to peer for the stuff that we need, whether it's food, whether it's shelter, whether it's transportation mechanisms, the Bitcoin that we have is going to be useless. It is going to be useless. It's going to be cut off from every single one of these places that you can exchange it back in a fiat readily, or you're going to have to pay some absurd fees to actually spend it. If we don't do the circular economy stuff now, if we don't start getting our neighbors to accept it, like we're going to be stuck with a shiny rock. It's going to be as useless as gold if we don't build the tools to start using it in day-to-day transactions. So yeah, that's why I'm so passionate about making the documentaries and showing people that it is possible. And there are already people taking the risk, call it the risk to live on a Bitcoin standard, because it just makes it less daunting. But people need to realize, like, we don't know when the 6102 thing is going to come. I feel like that can has been kicked down the road a little bit with this administration. It seems that they're pretty open, and maybe they want to get rid of capital gains and all that. But if we're not building tools to actually use this technology that frees us from central bank slavery, if it just becomes another asset in our portfolio, they will eventually just come for your stocks and your houses and all that stuff if they need to escape a debt crisis, right? Maybe they can't print anymore. Maybe austerity is not a measure. Maybe they just start seizing your shit. And the whole point of Bitcoin is for that to not be possible to happen to you on an individual level. So, yeah, my word of advice for people is, like, if you care about Bitcoin, get out of the theoretical and explore what people are actually doing with it. And not only can that work to, give you some more positivity about the space and new things to talk about, but I think there's investment opportunities there too. I think the tools that people are building on Bitcoin, whether it's, Noster with these cool clients, or, it's these peer-to-peer marketplaces, like there's a lot of opportunity as an entrepreneur or somebody just with ideas to build a parallel system on Bitcoin. And ultimately, like, look, a little bit of backstory on me. I've been going off. The only reason I'm here where I am is because I was fortunate enough to buy Bitcoin at a point that was very early, and within a few months of me buying it, it went up like 500%. I was able to quit my job and start my own business. I had actually never really cared to start my own business, but when you have some money on your hands, it's either you throw it into the stock market or you try and build a passion project. And I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners who are going out there and they're doing stuff with their capital and they're starting new businesses and really interesting stuff. And there's a lot of Bitcoiners who are just kind of like, well, great, I'm retired. I just want to spend time with my family and all that. But I guarantee you, you don't come to Bitcoin out of boredom. You come because you are a person that seeks purpose. And eventually, all these Bitcoiners that are doing really well and all that, they're going to want to take their passion a step further. And so I implore everyone in this space, like, if you have Bitcoin, you're sitting on some, like, don't be afraid to spend a little bit to start a business or to, spend some time becoming an educator yourself. There's a significant capital cost in doing that. Because if we don't get the word out about how this thing can be used and we don't start encouraging other people to use it, it turns into a easily 6102able asset. So, yeah.
Yeah, if not you, then who, right? Like this is
Yeah,
what I tell
exactly.
people. They're like, "Oh, I'm tired of orange pilling, trying to orange pill, but I don't do that anymore." I'm like, "Well, come on, man! Like, if you're not going to do it, who's going to do it? Like, if you're the annoying
Yeah,
Bitcoin
and
guy
pay
down the
someone to do
pub,
it, man. It's like the job's not done. It's like it's astounding how many people still are skeptical of it. My bigger concern, honestly, at this point, I think there's a lot of people who still think it's a Ponzi, bad for environment, whatever. I don't think about those people too much. I actually think they're pretty easy to persuade. I think the people that are going to be the hardest people to persuade are the people who are black pilled. And that's hard because when you're cynical about something and you're jaded and you think that everything is broken and you think that the CIA can crack Bitcoin and there's a backdoor and Satoshi might come back, like, that's a little bit of a harder thing to explain away into people's heads than, oh, but Bitcoin's melting the ice caps. Like, that's an easy piece of FUD to get rid of. Or, oh, no intrinsic value. Easy piece of FUD to get rid of. When people start talking about how BlackRock's going to corrupt this asset, that's a deeper conversation, and there's no like clear "you're wrong, here's why I'm right" answer. It's a deeper conversation, and we need to get more strategic and ready to have those conversations with a lot of people who are just cynical about the state of Bitcoin and all the stuff coming out about it.
Peruvian, did you have you done a deep dive on the 6102 yet? Is that something that's on your radar?
I mean, I know what it is at a high level. I know that it's the seizure of gold, right? They forced all gold holders to turn them into the U.S. government, and basically like that was one of the first things to sever the link between the dollar and gold. And when they went back, it was not $20 an ounce. It was 35 and then 42 actually. Right before the Nixon closing the gold window. So they devalued easily by double, right? By 100%. So yeah, the 6102 issue with Bitcoin, I think the way you prevent that obviously is self-custody. The thing that's concerned me recently is just the push towards centralized custodians, trusting the exchange blindly. And we just saw that this last week or two with Bybit, right? They got hacked for 1.4 billion. Now that was Ethereum, but an exchange that has its private keys on a cloud server, it's even if with encryption, even with security measures, there's always a way to get in there. And so you just don't want to trust exchanges. And I've been beating this drum for like years now, and I'm like, guys, just cold storage. It's not that hard. It's like 100, $200 to buy one. Watch some YouTube videos. It'll take you an afternoon, but you'll sleep so much better when you know that your Bitcoin is actually yours and that they can't, really take it. And, the black pill answer to that will be, well, the feds can send soldiers and torture
Mm.
you to get every single Bitcoin. And I'm like, well, think about it like this. It's like in the United States, there's more guns than people. And if every Bitcoiner has a gun, or at least some of the Bitcoiners have guns, and the feds go and like are shot at a third of these seizings, the soldiers who work for the Fed, they don't want to, for the feds, meaning the federal government, they don't necessarily want to die either. And if they're being ordered to do things that are that dangerous and then they don't see a reason for it, they probably won't go through with it either, right? Their power rests on the beliefs of the people. And if you wipe enough of that belief from the people, their power structure evaporates. Back in ancient Rome, there were actually these exoduses of the common people. So there's the patrii and the plebeians, right? There was the people who were like the fathers of the city, the patricians, the wealthy, the ones who owned the land and the money, and they were the politicians in the Senate. And then you had the plebeians, and they had this thing called the exodus of the plebeians, where when the plebeians got too pissed about some sort of corruption or money printing or anything, they would all like stage a walkout and they would just leave. And then the rich people would be left there trying to cook their own food and grow their own crops and wash everything. And then the rich people would have to make a deal with the plebeians to get them to come back. And it's that same story of like the Fight Club idea, right? Like we make your food, we do your laundry, we guard your house at night. Do not fuck with us. And you get enough people waking up, you get the inflation bad enough, and people just don't want to, enforce these laws from the government. And so my view on it is maybe a little less black pilled than people. I think inflation gets bad enough, the government lies get bad enough, the corruption gets bad enough. You see, even soldiers within the government or policemen within the government deciding to, not carry through their orders, right? Not go and try to die to take 2 Bitcoin from Joe Bitcoiner who lives in a cabin in New Jersey, right? Just doesn't make sense. So I think, again, the system is stronger the more decentralized it is, and it gets more decentralized if you take everything off the exchange and actually self-custody. So self-custody, protect your Bitcoin, hold it, and we'll get through this. I mean, humanity's been through, I think, even worse crises than even this inflation crisis. So I think we can survive, and I don't think we'll necessarily see like a zombie apocalypse coming. And so that's the issue in the FUD, I guess we have to fight against.
Decentralization across the nation. We need more nodes. So for those
Mm-hmm.
people listening that are, a little bit further down the rabbit hole, you've self-custodied, you've done all that kind of stuff. That's your next end boss, right? Crack a node. Like there are some off-the-shelf options now. Otherwise, there are plenty of tutorials out there. It can be a pain in the ass to go through this stuff, right? But
Mm-hmm.
again, if not you, then who? Because if there's 10,000 nodes out there, that's just not enough. We need 100,000 nodes. And that's what truly decentralizes the system and the network and the protocol, whatever you want to call it, and protects everybody. So we need more. Yeah, 2025. If you're listening, get to conferences, run a node, keep learning, keep sharing, keep educating, because it's down to us. That's the bottom line.
Oh yeah, and bonus perk, if you're the type of person that worries about 6102, guess what? All the layer 2 tools, for the most part, obscure privacy the more you use them. Confidential transactions on Liquid. I don't know if you want to keep your whole stash on Liquid, but it's there. Lightning, pretty much private by default as well once you start moving it around enough, and you could have your own node. You're not going to get 6102 when you have your stuff moving around on layer 2, right? You're not going to have your whole stash, but if you start using those tools, works to your advantage from a privacy perspective, which is still super important, regardless of the 6102 thing. People will just have labels on their head if you ever tweeted about how much Bitcoin you have. I made a stupid tweet like 3 years ago during the FTX thing where I was like, just bought one whole Bitcoin. I was like, oh shit. Like that probably is a dumb tweet in hindsight, because now if it ever goes to $1 million, people know I have $1 million probably, right? So
I'm sure you've spent it by now.
Yeah. Watch the OPSEC.
Mm-hmm. You haven't bought the Lambo yet?
No, man. I've it's just been all going towards these videos. We got a business going now, which is nice, but man, I just spent so much Bitcoin making these videos. It's so fun. I wouldn't have it any other way. But
talking of which, it would be remiss of me not to bring up your documentary about using Orange Pill app to travel around. That was cool.
Yeah.
That was very cool.
That was such a cool way that panned out. Yeah.
Explain what went down. Like, what was the premise? And because man, like some of the scrapes you got yourself out of, and some of the incredible experiences you guys had, like the being flown around in like a guy's plane, like what?
Yeah. So and this is awesome. You're involved with Orange Pill app. This has been the massive unlock to enjoying life so much more than just seeing the number go up. Is connecting with other Bitcoiners. It's the same with like Peruvian's not he doesn't live too far from me, so like our community in Vancouver has about 150, 160 Bitcoiners. We're one of the biggest Bitcoin communities in North America, I think. But this Orange Pill app conversation came around because Mateo was looking to get a documentary done, or he wanted to showcase that all these cool stories he was just getting DM'd about were happening with Orange Pill app. And he's like, we gotta show the world this stuff. Like I can write a tweet about it, but it's kind of cool to see it in person. And so he hooked me up with a guy named Jeff, who's out in kind of Chicago area and does intro flights with Bitcoiners. So that's super cool. But on the way there, I wanted to stop in New York and kind of see Pub Key because they have a bit of a social scene there. And what happened is there was a storm on the day that we were supposed to fly out, and our flight got delayed by 2 days, and every flight out of JFK and surrounding got delayed for 2 days. And New York's an expensive place, and every single flight was grounded for whatever reason. So all the hotel prices immediately went up to 800 a night. I would have had to go out to New Jersey or something to get something for under like 200 or 300, and we had blown through the budget already. So I was like, yo, anyone on Orange Pill app want to let me and my girlfriend like crash on a couch? And we found this amazing woman who had just joined Orange Pill app, I think like a couple hours before we put out that message. And she was like, yeah, sure, you can stay with me. And it's like I can't believe that whole story still. It's still so odd to me. We get there and we start talking about Orange Pill app and all this, and she's like, you look familiar. I think I watched one of your documentaries last week. I was like, that's insane. So yeah, we stayed with her, made a nice connection there, flew out to Chicago. I got to fly a plane. Um, Came back to Vancouver, interviewed some more Bitcoiners. But the whole point is that there's so much spiritual and value alignment between Bitcoiners, and you are missing out big time if you're not going to meetups or conferences and stuff. Because wow, these people say goodbye to the time you spend with your current friend group if you have a big one, because once you start spending time with serious Bitcoiners, those are like the only people you want to hang out with. You don't have to self-censor. You can start having deep conversations within like minutes of meeting them. People, they're just all like really honest and down to earth people. And, they all make you steaks if you come over to their houses. Really cool perk of making friends with Bitcoiners, but just awesome. Go out and make friends with Bitcoiners. I think that's the big unlock, is eventually that communal sense that we all get from understanding the asset and this sense of purpose. It will eventually amalgamate into us maybe starting our own country or shared living communities, because I would love to hang out with Bitcoiners 24/7. I love to have like they have co-working spaces. That's not enough. Like I want all of us to have a ranch somewhere and all grow food together and hang out and stuff all day, have a clubhouse or something. So yeah, that's my little tangent on that. But yeah, go out, meet other Bitcoiners. Orange Pill app's amazing for that.
Yeah, nicely done, mate. Yeah, and I say on pretty much all the podcasts, get to a conference, get to your meetup, meet your local Bitcoiners. Peruvian, are you going to be at any conferences this year? People going to be running into you anywhere?
Yeah, I'm going to be speaking at the main Bitcoin conference in Vegas. I'm still debating whether I should go to El Salvador for the Adopting Bitcoin one. It's still in El Salvador, right? In November.
Yeah, adopting Bitcoin's great. Plan B was impressive. I really enjoyed that one. I think they're doing it again in January next year.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm planning to go to at least one or two of these meetups because I agree. The energy and the in-person connections you make at these things are really unparalleled. And I was just up in Vancouver actually just a few weeks ago to visit Julian, and we went to the meetup, the Vancouver Bitcoin meetup, and they had the mayor speaking, and there was like 300 people in attendance. It was like the most packed it's ever been. And the mayor was talking about his proposal to buy Bitcoin for the city treasury. And it was so awesome to see somebody at the highest levels of, at least the highest levels of local government, right, talking about the problems with inflation, how it's underreported, how people's wages are being stolen, and how all the city's funds that they get from taxes, which is theft, they're forcibly taking from people, are just being put into local municipal bonds and like treasury bonds. It's like, what are they doing? Like, why are they're taking people's savings and then putting it in the worst savings device, which is bonds. And so it was so encouraging to see someone like him talking about buying Bitcoin for the city. And I hope that more mayors can take his lead because, getting this groundswell kind of support is really encouraging.
Well, hopefully,
Yeah.
podcasts like this, if he tunes in and listens and understands about the Federal Reserve and how that was set up, and like we said before, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and hopefully, your documentary might even make it across there. Get it in front of him for sure, because let's keep educating. All right, guys, last question. If you had
I
one
got I
last
got a
orange,
sneak preview on the next doc if you want, real quick too.
yeah, go on.
This is going to be out in a week from recording, so probably around the time you post this, it'll be out. We talked a lot about inflation, right, and
Uh-huh.
how they manipulate things. They have 10,000 economists at the Fed that are changing what the definition of rent is and all that. The biggest one is food, right? Like
Mhm.
out of control food inflation, riots immediately. Like we can have 20-30% housing costs year over year, and there's no protests over that little stuff, but price of eggs goes up or beef or whatever too fast, too quick, riots in the street. So I decided last year that I was going to eat bugs for 30 days because at first I thought, okay, this is one of those global warming nut job things, right? Where they're like, oh, the cows are polluting the atmosphere, the methane and all this stuff. So all the globalists want us to start eating bugs. And then I realized, no, the plan is not to get us to consume handfuls of crickets. The plan is to use the byproduct, the protein content from the bugs, and put it in absolutely everything without you even knowing it, right? To make it as filler in chips, in bread, in pasta, and all this stuff. And literally 2 weeks ago, the European Union passed a law which allows food manufacturers to take up to 4% UV treated mealworm powder and put it with just a tiny little label inside of any type of pasta, rice, or cheese product. So now in Europe, unless you're checking your labels in the next few months, you could be ingesting mealworm powder. So this is not any like Alex Jones right wing conspiracy thing anymore. Anyways, this all happened after I ate bugs for 30 days, but no spoilers. I had some insane health complications after eating bugs, the majority of my calories for a bit. And that documentary is dropping in about a week or maybe after this podcast out. So stay tuned for that one. There's a whole revelation on how that connects with inflation and money and all that. But
Love
yeah.
it. So, what's the YouTube channel people should subscribe to?
It's at Get Based TV. Get Based. We're all based here in Bitcoin. Get Based TV. Same thing on Twitter.
Excellent. Right. So, the final question. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. Um, huh. It's like, do you give it to someone who is close to you that just hasn't gotten orange pilled yet, or do you give it to someone who has a lot of influence in the world? I don't know. What do you think, Peruvian?
It has to be influence, man. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I would love if I could get, my parents more orange pilled or, my brothers, but I I could I'll stack enough so I can give them some of my sats. I would prefer if someone at the highest levels of the US monetary system was orange pilled because I think I've talked about this in prior podcasts, but the US dollar system is basically the bedrock of the global monetary system. And so if you orange pill like a Besant or a Powell, then you are essentially orange pill like they're the nuclear beating heart of the Death Star. If you change the dollar, you by default start changing all these other fiat currencies. And imagine the world in which, the Fed says, oh, we're going to be moving from a dollar standard to a Bitcoin standard for large, international balances as a reserve asset, like to settle trade or to settle balances. And then they start buying Bitcoin and they're printing dollars to buy Bitcoin. And then they're basically telling other central banks, like, look, you guys, hey, the Chinese, the Japanese, the British, the Europeans, if you guys want to come with us, you can. If not, you can wait and watch your currency be devalued against Bitcoin exponentially every single month for the next, 36, 48, 72 months. Like, get ready because we're not going to stop buying $100 billion of Bitcoin a month. And that would put all of these other central banks kind of almost panicked of like, oh shit, we need to be buying Bitcoin. We need to be accumulating. And that could obviously drive the Bitcoin price into the stratosphere and actually help to legitimize it. But I think that would be one answer. The other answer could be orange pilling someone at the highest levels of like the regulatory apparatus. So the SEC, getting them to completely clear apart any restrictions for mining, any restrictions for exchanges to buy and sell Bitcoin, get rid of all the stupid KYC and AML laws. Like those don't do anything. They don't actually catch any crime. All they exist is like a surveillance tool for the state to basically watch people's funds. And you modify those things and you legalize, Bitcoin, especially as like a form of tender, and you make taxes payable in Bitcoin. I think you see leaps and bounds in in progress in not only the Bitcoin ecosystem as in the companies, but also obviously in the price itself. So that would be like the two options, either the Fed or like the SEC.
Okay, I'm gonna do you one even better. My personal orange pill, Xi Jinping. You
Okay.
orange
Why?
pill
Why?
the leader of China, and he's like, I gotta have Bitcoin. Oh wait, I have the most energy production in the world. I have the largest population in the world. I have one of the fastest growing economies, in the G whatever. The guy's going to go ape into Bitcoin. And then every other country is immediately put on watch. What are you going to do? Put out garbage FUD about it? No, you can do that. But anybody with half a brain cell will know, holy crap, like the space race just started. And Bitcoin price goes to basically infinity. If that guy gets orange pilled and he starts, because he gets to just call the shots, right? Like he doesn't have to, worry about ever getting voted in again. So he gets orange pilled, and it's Bitcoin mania in China, and then it's game on for the globe. And in a couple months, Bitcoin's at 100 million for sure.
So have you chatted to Roger Huang? He's Vancouver, I think.
No, I haven't. I haven't.
He wrote this book.
Oh, I've seen that book. Yeah.
Would Mao hold Bitcoin? I've done a podcast with him. It's definitely worth you guys listening. He's really very, very interesting, and his whole family is still in China, and it's I don't know, I don't even think he'd risk setting foot back on back in China because of what he's written, and he's yeah, he's a great guy, great book, worth checking out. So yeah, Roger Huang. So get him, get him on the horn. See what he thinks about orange pilling.
I'll have to get in touch with him. Yeah, but that's my like that's I can't think of someone that would have a faster impact to the price of Bitcoin than orange pilling him. I don't
And
know, Peruvian. What do you
Peruvian,
think?
I have no idea who you said your first time around when you come on. Goodness me, it was a long time ago.
I don't remember either. I mean, I probably would have given a similar answer, like go for the beating heart of the Death Star and just go to the Fed. The other answer that I might have given back then, especially, was like the Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman, right?
Mm,
If you're sitting on trillions of dollars of oil wealth, imagine that money going into Bitcoin, and imagine him asking to settle oil contracts in
Mhm.
Bitcoin instead of petrodollars. Imagine the change to the global monetary system because, obviously the
Over
economy is
over the
based on
Lightning
energy.
Network, of course, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He could. And how many mining, like how many wells do they have in Saudi that are like, unproductive sometimes, or they're the line breaks or whatever, the pipe breaks, and they're unable to like ship the natural gas or the oil out, and they could just have a little like Bitcoin miner right there. They'll just burn any excess and use the energy to mine. Like it just is a very clear synergy, I think, that he hasn't really grasped yet, which is unfortunate because there's a huge gold mine there.
I
Right.
think they're
Okay.
starting to get it in Dubai, but they're the thing is they all keep quiet about it. Like Putin obviously gets it too, and all these guys are just like, don't sound the alarm too loud. Like we don't want everybody buying this thing, right? Just
Mhm.
enough to let people know that like it's real, but not
Mm.
enough to make people panic.
Well,
Mhm.
long live the plebs. We need more plebs buying. So
Yeah.
let's keep fingers crossed. Right. So at Get Based TV, Julian, we've got your hand off there. Peruvian, where do you want to point people to come and find you?
Sure, I'm at Peruvian_bull on Twitter. I also have a Noster. My NPub is linked in my extended bio on Twitter, or you can just search me on Noster, and I should be one of the first people to pop up. And then I also obviously have a YouTube channel called Peruvian Bull, and I have a Substack which has both free and paid memberships, which is called $endgame.substack.com.
Excellent. All right, guys. Was there anything else we didn't cover that you wanted to get off your chest, and any like closing final thoughts?
No, man, this was wonderful. The doc came out a little. It feels like the doc came out forever ago because I'm always on the move. But yeah, I hope everyone watching this gets a chance to check out the doc. I let me know if you have any feedback. I'd love to explore this topic again at some point in the future. Peruvian Bull and I are actually we're heading to Japan in 2 weeks, and we're doing a whole documentary about central banking in Japan and the yen and all that because
Huh.
they have a very interesting story that kind of breaks all the rules that we think about money printing. And so I'm excited to share that. We're filming it in 2 weeks, probably be out sometime in July.
Didn't the Bank of Japan hold like some crazy high percentage of like the stock exchange, the Nikkei? Or, like, do you know of the offhand Peruvian?
Well, I know they hold over 50% of the entire government bond market, and they were buying equities via the ETFs, and I think it was like, yeah, 20% or so of the total float of the Nikkei.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've created a bubble of massive proportions. And so our next journey is down the yen rabbit hole and understanding, what are the effects of decades plus of QE infinity and ZERP and monetary manipulation at the highest level, and what does
No.
that do to the populace and the economy and the markets. And I think this is going to be one of the most interesting and fun documentaries that we'll get to film, so I'm really
And
excited.
the carry trade thing, right? Which
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. That's
And
actually a lot.
Metaplanet, they're a big part of the story.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot to talk about. And I've written about the yen a lot, and that's actually why I got invited to a lot of these podcasts in the first place, was my writings on the yen. So I'm excited because all these years of research on it is now finally starting to come to fruition. I think we're going to create an amazing final product. I'm really excited.
what's the Princes of Yen? Is that a book?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a book and a documentary. That one's really interesting if you're looking to get into understanding how the Japanese banking system worked and how it was manipulated by the central bankers to essentially force economic outcomes that they wanted. And it's really depressing. And I'll warn you that, like, especially if you watch the documentary, when they talk about, first of all, the massive credit bubble they created by the central bankers, like literally calling up commercial banks and asking them to open their discount window and lend. They're like, you need to lend 500 billion yen today. And we need to make sure daily quotas, like, you need to be lending this much. And all these banks are lending, 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 creating a massive credit boom. And then it just pops and jobs disappear. Homes are foreclosed upon. The stock and bond market fall 50, 60, 70%. And just the malaise and depression by the average Japanese person that they experienced in the 90s was horrific. And we saw, suicides rise by hundreds of percent. They were what were called deaths of economic despair, right? Where people are just either, don't eat, or they start using drugs, or they just, go out into the woods and disappear. Like, those kinds of things started to happen in mass after the popping of the bubble. So it's sad, but we get a real impact and like a look at, like, these, the effects of these central banks are not some ephemeral, um, you know, like, in theory effect. It's a real world thing that actually affects real people and hurts real people. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's going to be, I think, eye-opening, but I think it's also going to be good for people to understand how this system works.
That one's going to hit close to home. I was in Singapore from 1999. I was actually over there at the end of 98, and I was brokering dollar yen for foreign exchange options desks. And you would see like the volatility in that market was crazy. Like the Bank of Japan would just come in and intervene out of nowhere and just like
Hmm.
push the exchange rate in one way or the other. And everybody's now got to like resettle their portfolios and mark to market. And it was great as a broker, as a rent seeking,
Hmm.
like fiat sucking from the Cantillon effect. That was brilliant for us guys. We loved it. We didn't even know what was going on.
Hmm.
Like, I look back, I didn't even know what fiat currency was. It's just like, oh my goodness. Like, and it wasn't, you weren't thinking of the downstream effects. it was all about just getting the next deal. And like what you've just described, you don't think about the families, and you don't think about people's wealth just getting absolutely destroyed, or their businesses getting destroyed because of the flick of a pen of some bright sparks in these, centralized positions of power sitting on the throne. Yeah, it's oh, come on, Bitcoin standard, everybody. Let's make it happen.
Mask off, man. We're taking the
Yep.
masks off.
All right.
Happening.
I'll leave you guys. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for everything you do for Bitcoin, and hopefully I'll see you in Europe sometime. If you're over here, hook me up, and I'll cook your steak. You're welcome anytime. Find me on Orange Pillow.
Beautiful. Same here if you come to Canada.
All right,
Anytime.
brother.
Yeah, same here for Seattle, although I'm not that far from Julian. So if you come to visit Julian, just let me know and I'll drive up.
Excellent. All right. Have fun,
Cool, man.
guys. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you.